Good evening. Welcome to the Reloved Guitars workshop. I'm Sam, and here is where we take unloved budget guitars that people have abandoned because they're either worn out or set up badly, or they just can't live with them anymore. And we bring them here to the workshop, which I can take you on a quick guided tour of. It's very dramatic and glamorous. Here it is, the workshop, full of cardboard at the moment, some oak, and underneath these cloths is an oak travel guitar waiting to take shape. And ladies and gentlemen, here we have, fresh from the streets, the mean streets of London in fact, we have a Squier Stratocaster Standard series by Fender, rescued in the week from a Gumtree advert, and in a right old state by the time I got to it. And let's just put it down on here and have a quick sort of flyby look at it. And so this is the Squier Stratocaster Standard series, strangely named Standard. It's a weird name, Standard series. You'd think that somebody would give their products an exotic name, but no, Squier gave it the name Standard. You probably can't see too close. But this thing I picked up in the week. I saw it advertised on Gumtree. When I saw it, the bridge was tilted up like that. But I could see in the picture that it was indeed a Standard, and I know that, contrary to what the name suggests, I know that the Standards are some of the best Squier Strats there are. So I went off in search of this one, hunted it down, and sure enough, it's a pretty good, reasonably good, I'd say, all-round condition Squier Standard, which means it will polish up nicely. It's nice thickness. I've only got a couple of little scrapes here which we can polish out, but all told, it's all in good nick. I have checked it out. I don't think you can see exactly, but let's see if I can, oh God, turn this round without getting dead flies in my cup of tea. Hard to see. There are a couple of tiny cracks which don't go very far actually. There's one that's about, I don't know, just under a centimetre long or so down there in the corner, and I think the faintest hint of one on this side as well. You know, evidence that the guitar's been clonked somewhere, like so many guitars have. I was thinking if we got any here, but the others with cracks are in the house. So sometimes that happens. Not a major structural problem, but have to be very clear that it does have those little tiny cracks. Again, at that sort of level, perfectly safe, no weakness. But they can be quite large on some guitars, and when they are big, there is definitely an issue of structural weakness. In fact, I bought a guitar specially to fix up the cracks because I wanted the experience of it. So I bought the most knackered one I could possibly find. Now if I put the camera over there, you're going to get blinded. So yeah, so here we have the standard Squier Standard Strat. I'm just going to fire away straight into this thing because it does play, by the way. I've plugged it in and tried it out, but I'm just going to get everything off this guitar now. It's going to need a good all-round clean because it is it's a bit sad and it needs some polishing on the bodywork and stuff, so we're going to pay a bit of attention to that. But just to fire straight away, take all the strings off and take the neck and everything off, all the bits off, give them all a good thorough clean up. As part of the whole reloving process, I'm going to treat it in a way that it hasn't been treated for a long time because it's been neglected. The person I bought it off was a bit odd. It appeared to be a girl of aged about 12, which was very odd to go traipsing out Edgware in the middle of the night, 8 o'clock-ish on a Wednesday night in London, and to end up being let into a house by what appeared to be a 12-year-old girl on her own, selling me a guitar for cash. Anyway, whether or not she was 12, she may have been a sort of strange-looking 20-something-year-old, I don't know, but as a sort of middle-aged bloke going to buy guitars, you find yourself having to sort of try and be really, you know, friendly and ultra unthreatening, because you realise that you're in somebody's house, which is really, really odd. So I asked her if she played it, and she said no, she'd only ever played Titanic, and then gave up because she couldn't do it. So this guitar had probably been left sitting in someone's room for a long, long time, and when I picked it up, the bridge was just sticking way forward, and the action as a result was hugely high, so no wonder the poor girl couldn't play anything on it. But it's like one of those things, if you didn't know anything about it, and it looks to me, first of all, like the reason that was happening is that there's a spring missing in the back, which we can replace easily. But if you didn't know that, and you tighten the strings and then the whole thing, the whole bridge went forward, and your action consequently became much higher. You know, you wouldn't have a clue what was going on. You'd just know that it would be unplayable. So, yeah, I bought it anyway because I could see that it was all sound, pretty much sound. And here we are, back to the Reloved workshop for a bit of TLC. Now while this neck is on here, I'm just going to give it a once, just an all over clean. And not that it has to be done, I don't have to have it clean at this stage, I could clean it later in bits or whatever. But I quite like the process of giving it a clean now, because it's a good opportunity to sort of have a nose around and see what you can see. It gives you the heads up on any issues that you might otherwise miss. So what we've got here is a maple neck with maple fingerboard, and it's I never quite know with these things. It's a single piece. It's not like it hasn't got a cap on it or a solid body with a fingerboard on top. It's just one piece. And it's frets at this end are fairly good condition. It's got some finger, or had some finger goo. It's going down at this end, or from about here onwards. So somebody's played it a fair bit. Maybe just cranking out that wonderful Celine Dion number. Every night in my dream. That one. This has come out nice and clean. And it's obviously, apart from having a bit of superficial goo, it's obviously not really been used much, so underneath that it's a very, very clean looking neck, which is great. Tiny little mark where it's been dropped and the strings being pushed into the wood. You can often see that. It's quite a giveaway, which also, by the way, may be the reason why it's got the cracks. In fact, it's almost certainly the reason. So a little bit of detective work kind of leads you to the conclusion of what went wrong. So it's fallen forward on its face, and it's hit something. It hasn't actually. Let me see. It's not fallen flat. It's fallen onto the surface, which has pressed that string into the fret, into the fingerboard at that point exactly. That's where part of the force was impacted, but the secondary impact is that it's then put pressure on the neck heel of the guitar itself, and with the result that it's made those two very small cracks, which in a way I was getting away with it quite luckily, or fairly lucky to get away with it that much. Didn't break any more than it did. So there you go. There's the diagnosis. does it mean? Well, nothing really. That's no problem, that won't affect playing. And the, as I say, the cracks on the neck heel are relatively minor compared to many guitars that you come across. So that's good news for us, because it won't take so much to get this into a nice playing order. But we know already now, pretty sure we know what damage it's had. And then around the rest of the body there are a couple of little scratches and a few, no chips or anything, that's nice, no major dings, just little scratches and a few kind of paint swipes where it's been banged against lightly, well, not too hard, but some scraped against paintwork or something and the paint comes off. Yeah, all good. All the machine heads are in pretty good working order. Here comes Morris. Hey Morris, were you born in a barn? And that's all the cold air in. And he's going to want to get involved in cleaning, dismantling of this guitar. So again, just a quick clean up lets me see this, the scratches and scrapes that it's had, and they're all polishable by my reckoning. Some of them are a bit more significant than others, but I say they are all, should all be polishable, outable with a bit of elbow grease and persistence. Okay, so that first all-round assessment looks good. I'll take the neck off. And I'm going to do a little trick I figured out the other day. So when you've got a neck, the bolts that hold the neck on all guitars, there will be at some point there will have been a manufacturer's specification for how tight to do this, to do up. Hey, Morris, you don't want my tea. I don't want you to want my tea, is what I mean. Okay, you just stay there. So there will have been a specification for how tight to do these up. I don't know what that is, but if you start with your screwdriver and you pick a torque setting on your screwdriver, start with whatever you like, low as you like, but I'm going to start with 4, and I'm currently trying to find a screw head that fits. I could use a new set of these and spanners. So I'm going to start with 4 and try and undo it on the 4 setting, and it comes straight away. So I'm going to do it on 3 on the other one, and it skips, so 4 it comes undone. So straight away you know to do this one up to 4 when it comes time. So I just thought that's quite useful. Now it will vary depending on the charge you've got in your screwdriver, but all things... Woohoo! Watch out, you. Morris, it's not the best place to be, my friend. Come here. You don't want to let go, do you? Because you're feeling insecure. You big lump. Why don't you go on the chair next to the nice warm radiator? Here, look. Now he's going to go out the door and let the cold air in again. Yeah, so all things being equal, whatever that means, we now know that the torque setting for these things when they were done up was 4 on my screwdriver, and that means I can make a note about this if I want, just to be on the safe side, and I'm just going to tell myself to do it up with 4 next time when I can put it back together again. Okay, so again, it's not scientific, but it will keep, keep me roughly on track. Now, as I'm taking the neck off now, I just want to gently let it come away, come apart, and I'm looking underneath for shims, which I found one straight away, and none on this part here. Okay, so I'll show you if you haven't seen a shim before. That's what your shim looks like. In this case, it's a little piece. Well, actually, it's a little piece of special material that's made, I think, specially for making shims. And what I recommend for you to do is if you find a shim, is to get a pencil or pen or whatever, and get rid of some of the sawdust around it, but I would recommend drawing around it so you know exactly what position that shim was in when you found it, because if it drops off, which it probably will do, then you know where to put it back. In fact, this is what it is a piece of sanding belt which is of a certain thickness, and the purpose of the shim is to, if you put a shim underneath the neck, it will tilt the neck up, and it allows you to change the angle of your neck. And the point about this is, if we want to put this guitar back together again and recreate the exact same geometry, if you like, then we want this shim to be in the exact same place. What I would do, I'm not sure where I keep it, I would recommend to tack it or glue it or whatever, glue it I mean, not tack it as in nails, but glue it into place so that it stays where you want it, and don't put too much in there so it actually adds thickness to it. I mean, it's going to a fraction, but not too much. And then spread it out with something, which in my case would be, if I could find one, a cocktail stick. Sorry about this. My toolbox needs modernising, I'm afraid. Can't get to anything. Okay, so just a tiny bit of glue there, it's not much. I'm just going to put that back in and just drag it along to its correct position. And part of the reason I think they use sanding material is to stop it slipping anyway once it's in place. Okay, so I've glued that in place, and I'm going to put it off to one side for a moment. But what I do know is that should that excuse me, I was doing some sanding earlier on, filing actually. Yes, so should that shim come off, then at least I know where to put it back on. Okay, so now what I want to do is to take off the rest of the gubbins on this guitar, and to do that I want to heat up my soldering iron, because some of these bits I want to take the pick guard away from the body, and to do that I'll need to unsolder that. Comes another one of the cats. They don't leave me alone. Okay, so off for the springs, which then allows the tremolo, it's a floating tremolo, so it's not tied in by any screws, and that allows that to come apart nicely. Also we'll take out the tremolo pins, which is where the kind of things that, I don't even know what they're called really, the little bits that the tremolo floats on. Keep them off to one side safely. And I'm also then, excuse me again, what are you doing, you tool? I'm going to get my plastic things out to try and help me if I need to. No, these are coming off okay. Getting the tone and volume off. Little technique. 4 fingers pulling upwards. Usually it works. Not always. And if it doesn't, then you can get yourself a piece of plastic, which again that's now too thick, or a piece of metal. This one's going to be stubborn. Okay, a thin piece of metal to begin with, and you don't want to be doing this if it's anywhere near your your guitar's finish. This isn't wanting to play fair. It's got tapered edge, and get that under there. Come on, you. Good under there. Now we can get it off. Just fiddly. Okay, so let's get all the pickguard screws out. And this, taking the pickguard away, will give us a chance to polish the body without the pickguard getting in the way, and that means we don't build up a kind of grimy edge of polishing cream around underneath the edge of the pickguard, which you often do if you try and do it with that in place. This finish, I'm not sure what it's called, but this finish is a very common finish for this standard Squier, and it's a sort of a coal black with metallic flecks in it. It's very nice, very understated. So that's everything undone, and away it comes. Okay, it's quite a lot of room. There's a bit of leftover cable tie in there that's broken off, and we have hot soldering iron, so we can just take off the it's loose, this thing. Anyway, it will just take off the wires to this thing here called the jack plug input. Put that away. Just flip it over for a second and we'll undo the earth wire which comes through the back here. There's not a lot of play in that, so I'm going to need a pliers to just pull it out of the way. There we go, unhooked, which means we can now take the whole pickguard off. A bit of gentle pulling, so there we have it. And all very simple, quite nicely, cleanly wired up under here. The two bits I need when it's time to put it back together again, and we can give that a little clean up on its own. And then in there we've got a guitar that's cavities that are routed out for the humbucker, single coil humbucker configuration. So these bodies give the Squier factory people a lot of configuration options. And so while I'm here, I'm just going to give this a bit of a kind of rub down, just to get some of the grime that's built up under the edge of the pickguard out of the way. Historically, you get all that sort of high tide, high water mark, or whatever you might call it. It's pretty mucky. So this is a chance to make it feel all a lot cleaner, as well as then spending some time polishing it so it actually becomes a lot cleaner. But it's so much easier then to work on it like this without any of the other stuff in the way, and we can just, I don't know, take that inside, put TV on and just whatever, do it in comfort without the neck getting in the way and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so for this part of the thing, what I'm also going to do at this stage is to clean these component parts. And I don't know if you can see, but these guitars, they're really nicely made. I mean, actually this isn't that impressive. The Fender guitars, Squiers, always have cheap saddle blocks or bridge blocks, tremolo blocks. If that was a vintage brand guitar made by Hornby Skews, that would be a great big lump of steel. Instead, on a Squier, it's a chunk of moulded cast, what do you call it? Alloy of some kind. Is that right? Some sort of alloy. It's pretty horrible. Also very brittle, it breaks and crumbles. And doesn't, because it's not solid steel, it doesn't really doesn't really kind of help the strings to resonate very well. Anyway, meantime, just to make this thing freshen up, I'm going to take all these bits off and give them individually a clean up and also a clean underneath, so that when we put it back on, this bridge plate will look nice. It won't change the way it works particularly, but it makes it look a hell of a lot nicer. It's a bit of care and attention after several years of just being ignored. There we are, nearly there. Has some quite often you'll see on a bridge like this, there's some scoring of the chrome plating, where people have done intonation settings or alterations, adjustments. I think you may or may not see it, but underneath some of that grime, you might see that it scratches away the chrome to the, I don't know what they call that sort of copper-looking layer. It's the thing that kind of sticks before the chrome sticks, I think. Anyway, so moving around, setting of the intonation at different times, pretty much it's caused that. Over the years, whoever's owned this has done some adjustments. So give all that a clean. Again, get behind here, get rid of the grime from 10 years or whatever it is. I'm going to have a look at this neck. I'm not sure if I can't remember if the Squier necks tell us a year in these kinds of, this particular Squier model. But some of the guitars you can use the neck, the end of the neck, to date your guitar. I'm not sure if that's the case with this one. So that's the plate nicely shined up. It will look a whole lot better. And we can also do a clean up then on all these little bits, and to do that I'm just going to, for now, I'm just going to chuck them for a little bit of a soak in this solvent stuff here, and then I'll give them a bit of toothbrushing when they've had a soak, and hopefully that will kind of perk them up a little bit. God, geez, too much dust. Right, so I'm going to move the actually before I move the electrics out of the way, what I'll also do is give this a clean over with the same, this is lighter fluid by the way, I think I forgot to tell you, but it's a good all-purpose solvent, and I bought a fairly industrial sized 5 litre container. It's nothing quite like having enough of it so you can clean it, anytime you need. It's better for the finish than using household silicone based cleaners, which I would have been tempted to use before, things like Mr. Sheen, because they're always to hand and they're cheap, but you know, being silicone, they have downsides to them. And one of them is that, you know, silicone polish will coat your finish in a very thin layer of silicone. Now if it's a budget guitar like this, that's not too much of a problem, because you're unlikely to ever be taking this budget guitar to an expensive guitar luthier and spending hundreds of pounds to have the finish lovingly restored. But if it were your pride and joy vintage all original 1957 gold top wraparound bridge blah blah Les Paul, and you took the guitar that you've been polishing all its life since you'd owned it with Mr. Sheen, they tell me that the luthier, your luthier, wouldn't be best pleased, because apparently the silicone will stop the any repairs or lacquer or finish that they're trying to make repairs with stick to your stick to the guitar. so much so that some people in discussion forums online kind of go as far as to say that their luthier wouldn't touch the job with a barge pole if they heard that you'd used a silicon-based polish on it. So it's probably just as well not to. It's also why they don't advise you clean your brake discs on your motorcycles, or avoid spraying it on when you're polishing up your motorcycle to make it look nice. Don't get Mr. Sheen on your brake pads because you'll never stop again when you most need to. So I'm just giving these a quick scrub down to get any visible grime out of the way. Again, these are quite nicely machined little, or they look like, machined isn't the right word, but they're quite precise, nice, good looking little blocks. So there's no reason why you should leave them dirty, since they're so crisply constructed. Might as well look as good as they can. Of course, this lighter fluid goes without saying. It should do that. It is flammable. So just be careful. And if you smoke, don't be doing these things at the same time. Okay. I don't know, but I don't think you can get wasted on naphtha. Maybe you can. Maybe you can. Maybe that's what their whole hoo-ha is with kids buying it. I thought they'd put something in it. Then again, I don't know anything. Certainly not about sniffing lighter fluid. Okay, so I've got some cleaned up bridge saddles, which will all go towards making this guitar look a lot happier when it's put back together again. So I'm going to drop these into the container, which I've immediately misplaced, which is right here. Okay. Right, so what I want to do next is kind of the important bit, really. And here we have, I suppose, what's the heart of the guitar. And it's the neck, of course. This is the bit that you have your primary interaction with, and it's a bit that kind of can make or break the experience of playing a guitar. And of course the electrics, quality of the pickups and the overall look and feel are important, but so is right at the core of it, the heart of it, the neck, and the condition of the frets. And so that's why when I do a setup, at the heart of it all is getting this bit right, the frets. I've discovered since started doing this that let's have a quick look at this, both the same size. Many luthiers or guitar techs or whatever have a service that they call a setup, and I've spoken actually to a lot of people who've had setups, inverted commas, done on their guitars, and I've also spoken to quite a few people who aren't happy with the setup that was done on their guitars, and I asked one, in fact, at the weekend, tell me a little bit about, what he wasn't happy about when somebody else had done his guitar. And he said he gave the guitar to this person, and they said, yeah, no problem, I'll set it up. And then what happened is, he said he got it back, and the guitar, the action was even higher than when he gave it to them. And very often what a luthier will do, by the sounds of it, is to take the guitar and try to adjust the action to make it play better, and that might be a tweak on the truss rod, or it might be changing the action at the bridge. It might even be doing something with the saddle, the nut at this end. But if it doesn't involve leveling the frets, then it's really limited in what it can achieve. And the guy I was talking to, his problem was that he had uneven frets, as, by the way, 100% of electric guitars do. I've found so far. It might not be all in the universe, but 100% of the random sample of 60 odd guitars that I've come into contact with have uneven frets. And apologies if you've heard this all before, but of that 100% of guitars I've found have uneven frets, each individual guitar tends to have between 50 and 70% of their frets uneven as well. So it's not just a few, it's every guitar, and it's not just a bit on every guitar, it's the majority of the frets are uneven in relation to each other. And so the impact of that, or the result of that, is that you can't, whoever's setting the guitar up, or the owner, whatever, cannot set the action below a certain point, because if you do, the effect of the unevenness of the frets comes into play, and you start getting buzzing and choking notes. So somebody who does a setup without leveling the frets will basically not have much leeway to work with, because they will only be able to set the action so far as they can before the limitation of the frets kicks in, and they have to then back off because the frets are buzzing and choking, the notes are choking. So my whole philosophy from the beginning has been, if you're going to do anything, you've got to start with making this right, the frets. And until you've done it a bit like I have, I'm not saying there's millions of people who have done it, but if you're not somebody who's done it, then of course you won't know that every single guitar is riddled with uneven frets. You, like me, when I was just a player, couldn't possibly imagine that was the case. You would sort of think, no, surely not. With the technology, ow, there's my back. With the technology that we have today, or the quality control processes and so on, there's no way that every one of these guitars would come out with uneven frets. But it takes having done it and done this work for a bit to discover that is in fact the case. And so any setup that's done on a guitar is done with a guitar that has uneven frets, and if you do a setup on a guitar with uneven frets, then you can't really achieve much at all. And in the case of the guy at the weekend, this weekend, when he came to buy the guitar from me, the only thing that the guitar tech he took it to could do was to raise the action, when in fact what the customer was hoping would do something to mean that it could go lower. And of course the only thing that would have allowed it to go lower would be to do the work we're lining up to do now, which is fret leveling. So just as a quick whiz by while I was taking you through that, what you possibly saw me doing was getting the cleaning the machine heads up. Again, as I'm cleaning them, A, it's making it look a lot nicer, ready for when it's back together again, and B, it's checking out to see if there are any more substantive problems, which there aren't. So it's a kind of a nice, slow, relaxing way of checking everything out. Clean and check. So now I've got some machine heads going back on here, some tuners, whatever you want to call them, which frankly look brand new, and they certainly didn't before, but now they're in great shape. And I will put those and the string, excuse me, the string trees back on, and this part, that bit of the neck will be ready to go. We won't have to touch anything else. Yep, so clean and diagnose is probably a good way to think of it. So yeah, I don't therefore do a setup without doing fret leveling, and you'll see in a minute, if you stick this out. I don't blame you if you don't, because it's a long, drawn-out process. But you will see that it takes about an hour and a half to level the frets on this guitar, and to repolish, or reshape and repolish the frets after that. And if it takes that much time to do, you sort of can start to imagine why it doesn't get done, and why so many, the vast majority, if not all, guitars out there have uneven frets. Right, so it's done, and I'm just going to, it's totally anal, or whatever the word is, but I'm just even going to give these a quick clean cause. I've taken them off, there's no point in putting them back on dirty. Right, so getting ready now to do the neck work, and we're going to level the frets. We're going to reshape them, because leveling them will put a flat spot on them. It will make them all nice and level, but it will put a very unhelpful flat spot across the top. And once we've reshaped them or reprofiled them, then we're going to need to polish them again, because in order to play them, to bend strings backwards and forwards on them, they're going to need to be smooth and not covered in scratches that the fret leveling tool is going to put on them. So the first stage in all of that process is going to be protecting the fingerboard. So I'm going to go straight away into putting masking tape onto the fingerboard, and I'm going right up to the edges of the frets, leaving all of the fret clear. And as I'm doing it, again, this is one of those things, you can check out the condition of the frets as you're doing it, in a really close look. You have to take time to do this, and in doing so you can see where there are flat spots on the frets from where the guitar has been played on open chords a lot, and you can also identify any chips or dents that have been made from other mishaps or accidents. It's just all good stuff, and you might see if there's a fret sticking out that's in danger of falling out, in which case you might have to do some drastic work. Okay, so again, you'll notice none of this, I'm hoping you'll see from the video actually that none of this is can be rushed, but in the same way, on the plus side, none of it's also rocket science. So you don't have to be a genius to do any of this, and you don't need to have studied applied mathematics or anything like that. In fact, you don't even have to refer to a manufacturer's manual or specification, which kind of answers some people's questions who commented on YouTube videos of this, asking me why don't I use a certain kind of ruler, or why don't I do a certain kind of thing, and it's mainly because I do most of this by eye, or by kind of common sense logic, and you'll see a bit of that later on when it comes to we come to talk about, or come to do, set the string height over the first fret, and there's not a manufacturer's measurement in sight. It's all done by kind of common sense relationship observation about the string height when you're playing with a capo, but we'll come to that later. So as I say, none of this is from the book. It's all done by observation and common sense. So here's what I'm doing right now is I've got to protect the fingerboard, and to do that I'm using masking tape. But you could start to see there that the frets get closer together, so I can't use the same thickness of masking tape all the way down, because it would cover up the tops of the frets, which I need to keep exposed. So what I'm doing is taking the time to set up some strips of masking tape. And I'm going to cut them quite precisely to different thicknesses. Again, fiddly, but important to do. What's really important to protect your fingerboard is to make sure you've got straight edges so that the tape can go right up to the straight edge of the fret and protect the underlying wood. And unless you can, if you've got a wavy line because you cut it by eye or didn't use a ruler, then you have a gap, and that means whatever you're doing with sandpaper or whatever will get through and potentially get through and damage your fingerboard. And if your fingerboard is the heart of the relationship with the guitar, then you're not doing it any favours. So that's why this part of the process takes as long as it does, and don't try and rush it. There's even there's a little devices you can buy called fret protector strips. I've got one I'll show you in a second. And the little metal strips that allow you to effectively mask off or protect off isolate one fret at a time. And they're kind of useful, in my experience now, I haven't tried them out. They're sort of useful if you've got literally got one fret to do, and you just need to get that fret taken care of in a hurry, and you haven't got time to mask that single fret off. But the downside of them is they take quite a bit of work to keep them in place, and they're a bit fiddly, and they bend, and I don't really think they're anywhere near as effective as doing what we're doing here. And they look like this. So it's a little thin metal strip which you can put some tape on. But look, first of all, it's 100 miles wider than the thing, so what am I going to do? Bend it round? No, then it arches up. So I've got to stick it there, and then I've got to work on the fret, and then I've got to unstick it and move it along. Just doesn't seem terribly worthwhile. Anyway, I made a mistake of putting forward that opinion once, and a vendor on eBay who had sold me a tool and a kit that included one of those got really angry that I had dared to say I didn't like that particular piece of equipment, as if A, it was his and it caused him great offence that I didn't like it, and B, as if he had somehow had the right to tell me what I could and couldn't say about a product I bought, which I thought was quite bizarre. Anyway, we had a fairly drawn out argument about it over time. Thankfully he went away. I never heard from him again. Still have his tool here in my toolkit. I just shudder, and I'm not stupid enough to throw it away, because there might be one day in the future I need it in a hurry, but I'm also not resilient enough to use it without remembering that strange man. Anyway, who would have thought you could get freaked out by a guitar tool? Okay, so you can see what the point of cutting this paper down was. Get the stuff off the board, but yeah, the purpose is obviously, it's obviously the sizes I've cut are just about right to allow me to whiz down the ever decreasing gaps. And I'll be able to do all the closer together ones as well. And then once I've done that, we're doing some checking to see how many frets are uneven on this guitar, and I can pretty safely predict it'll be about 65-70% of frets uneven. I suppose it's a bit bit easy in a way because that is turning out to be an average on most guitars, so I can't really go wrong. But it's yeah, it's about what it is. I'd be surprised if it's any less. Okay, so I'm just about switching over onto the thin stuff now. Bits I've cut into 3. This allows me to get to the narrow bits. So you can tell, if you don't have patience, this isn't the job for you. But also, as I say, if you're going to get this, get your guitar set up, I really would advise you don't get your guitar set up without this part of the process being taken care of, because they won't really be able to achieve that much for you otherwise. I mean, they might get a bit more. They might get you a little bit lower action by adjusting the truss rod and then dropping the action, because the truss rod adjustment will maybe give you a little bit more leeway, but more or less it won't. You'll be stuck at a limit. You can't go below. So if you really want a guitar to play well, go the whole hog, I say. Which is why I don't ever do it without going the whole hog. So it's, in my case, it's sort of current, rather low price of 75 quid or bust. Interestingly, from a business perspective, although I'm not doing this as a business yet, it may well be that it's not a really sustainable model at that price, which is why the other luthiers or guitar techs probably charge 140, 150 pounds worth for the time I'm putting in. But you know, even still, that's a fairly high hourly rate. But if you're taking into account premises, overheads, tax, VAT, and all that sort of stuff, then it's not so great a rate. So we shall see. I think what's good about doing this, even if it's a bit naive to do it at the rate I do it at, or the price I do it at, I'm not doing it to deliberately to undercut other people. I'm just doing it to kind of get the experience up, I suppose, or get experience under my belt, and also, I suppose, try and get a bit of a reputation for doing it well. And I suppose that's the value for doing it, even if it is cheaper than other people do it. It's not a bad thing to do to get yourself up to speed and noticed. Right, okay, so I'm going to stop at that. Really nice. So you can see we've got a nice covering protecting the fingerboard, and it's done around the back in these little tabs, which make it a lot easier to undo it at the end. Okay, so rushing straight along, first stage in this will be to do a measurement. By that I mean finding out which of the frets on this neck, or how many frets are even or uneven relative to each other. The first thing you've got to do before you do this or do any work with frets is make sure the neck is straight. Now here's one where you could use a special kind of ruler to do it, but I eyeball it down the neck. It's just more comfortable for me that way. I can tell fairly well. This is concave at the moment, and so to remove concavity I'm going to tighten the truss rod, and that means going clockwise. Mercifully, on these squares, the truss rod adjustment is here, and I've done about a 25-30 degree arc clockwise, and then I'm going to just recheck it and see where that's taken us to. Yeah, close. I'm going to let it sort of catch up a bit. I don't want to overturn it. So you can see that it was a very small amount of adjustment was, to give the result we needed. Right, so I have what's called a lever board of shame over here, which I haven't updated. Sorry, I haven't tidied up. I've updated it, but I haven't tidied it up for a while. But I'm just keeping a record of the relative unevenness of frets on various different guitars, and it's really just for my professional curiosity, I suppose you could say. If you're levelling your frets on your guitar, and if you're using a fret levelling file, something like this, you don't need to either check for the number of uneven frets or even mark them up or anything. You just go ahead and get stuck into the levelling part of it. But I'm going to do a check because it helps me keep a score on the leaderboard. And just for your information, the vast majority of guitars fall in the 50 to 75% range of uneven frets. So that's 15 out of 20 frets uneven in relation to each other, which is pretty substantial. Don't expect this Squier Strat to be any different. So here we go, starting with my fret rocker. I just put it across 3 frets at a time and try to rock it backwards and forwards over the middle, side to side I should say, over the middle fret. And if I can do it like that, that tells me where there's a kind of, on the surface it looks like a high spot on that fret. Now it could equally be a low spot on one or other of those. It doesn't really matter. What it matters is the relative evenness. So for this point in time, there's also a couple of nicks on that fret, which we'll also get rid of, which is great. Ooh, that's quite significant. Both ends of that, you can hear it. Both ends of that one with a gap in the middle. And I give it a heavier swipe with a pencil when it's significant. It's just a way of marking it out. Now, often it's often the case when you've got something like that with a gap in the middle, you find that the next one appears to be higher in the middle. The opposite of that. Don't ask me to try and explain why that is. It just is. There is a reason for it, but it's beyond my powers to describe it. Mainly because, as I said, it's hard to get your head around the idea that this is relative. It's not uneven according to some absolute. It's temporary because it's relative. Now, I can tell you now that is an enormous unevenness in this one here. I'm going to mark it as such. It's a really big deal, that one. What it means is when we come to level it, the fret file will take loads off the top of that one, and you'll see that one flatten out quicker than anything else. Okay, it's not rare to get 2 or 3 in a row with none. Wow. This one's kind of proving to me, well, it's a bit of an exception to the Squier standard Stratocaster rule. Not bad, in between the awful ones. Sometimes you feel so fine, I wonder if you're making it up. Okay, we're nearly there. Okay, so you you can see this bit isn't entirely strictly necessary. If I was in a factory trying to churn these things out in a hurry, I wouldn't be messing around necessarily marking them up. I'd just be doing the whole lot in one go and getting rid of all unevenness, regardless of where it was or how severe it was. Okay, so I've now, I can never remember, 22, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22 frets. Can't do the first and the second one, so it's out of 20. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 out of 20, firmly in the 55% department. Okay, so not unusual. Strat standard 35, that was a good one. Standard Strat 75. Yeah, so 75, 55, not so bad. But there we go, 55%. That's more than half of the frets on this guitar, just like all the others, uneven, and some of them quite severely so. Now, just coming back to reality, what that there means is those, if you're playing notes on the high strings and you're playing around here, that height of those couple of really high frets is so great that they would force you to raise the action to overcome them. Otherwise you would play notes around here and it would choke off on that fret or that fret. So that's the practical implication of this situation. It's not just a nice idea that they should be flat. If they're not flat, then you can't get a low action out of your guitar and you'll be constantly stuck playing a harder to play guitar than needs be. Right, so moving straight on, conscious of time, it always takes time, but there's no quick way around it. What we now do, first part of the process now, we've levelled the neck, we masked it off, we've checked it for level, we've adjusted the truss rod to make it level, it's nice and flat. I've checked the number of uneven frets and marked them up just for interest, you don't have to. Now I'm going to get ready to do the fret levelling, and to help us in that I'm going to need to mark or to draw on the top of each fret with a permanent marker. And again, please forgive me if you've watched these videos before, but I'm going to say it again because it could always be somebody's first time. If you're going to do this, do not get a big soggy wet marker pen, and do not let the pen, nearly did there, do not let the ink go down the side of the paper that butts up against the fret, because capillary action, as I found to my cost, will suck the ink straight underneath the paper and flatten it out as thin as you like but as black as you like all over your lovely maple fingerboard, and you will be doing wonders with sandpaper, micromesh sandpaper, for half an hour afterwards, as I've had to do in the past. So be careful that this ink only goes on the top part of the frets. Okay, so moving straight on, having done that, now that marker pen is a great way of telling me when I have and haven't been with my file, and my fret file is going to run down the neck and take away metal off the top, and it's going to take some metal off all the frets, but it's going to take more off the high ones. So without further ado, I get started. And for the faint-hearted, it is quite a harsh moment. You are straight away taking metal off your frets that you'll never be able to put back on, and there's no turning back. You just have to be confident and do it. And working my way across, horizontally across, and because I'm going in fairly thin strips, it's helping to gently follow the radius of the guitar to make sure that it doesn't flatten it all into one horrible lump. Now, you won't see this very well, but I can tell the place that there's really big, that you can really see big flat spots are on these dark, the places I marked as ultra high, and that's because they're so high it's taken more material off than anything else. But it's confirmation that what we knew was right. They are in fact high spots. Now what it also tells you now, when you look down this, you can see straight away where you haven't touched with the file, and you do need to get everything touched. If there's a spot with the black pen still showing, it may well be a low spot, which will still cause you problems unless you get everything down to that. I suppose you could call it the lowest common denominator. It really does apply. So I'm just going to take a bit more off. Note I'm going in the opposite direction, and to make sure I get all the way. Oh Christ, that hurt! Funny bone. All the way down to the this time the near end, which sometimes gets missed out. And if it is missed out, we can just make sure we get it with a couple of swipes down here. That's pretty much everything. Yep, okay. So at this point I'm going to brush off the kind of metal filings, because there's quite a bit of it. That's a very destructive process. But now I'm going to just do a quick diagram. Which again, I've done various forms a million times before, but I'll just do it again because it's easier to show. So what we had was we had some frets. They weren't this close together, obviously. And let's say, actually I've gone and drawn them at the same height. Let's say that one was higher than that one. So what we did was we came and we flattened them off, and both of them are a little bit flattened, but this one in particular is very much more flattened because it was much higher to begin with. Okay, and we'll say that this one has a little bit of a flat spot. Okay, so that's the current state of affairs. There's the high fret that had most taken off. When you have a normal fret that's shaped like a arch or a tunnel or whatever, the ideal position for the string is to sit in the middle. So I guess what the string does is it goes down the guitar like that. We're looking at cross section, but its intonation point sits right there on the midpoint of the fret. It's kind of, on the ideal fret, it's halfway across, so that if you're measuring distance to the bridge, the distance is that, and that's the that's what the string is. What do we call it? The fret is positioned so that that distance is correct to produce the right note. When you've flattened off the fret considerably like this, the string now sits on a flat spot like that, and instead of the intonation point being there, it's actually moved to there, which means the distance is shorter by, if you looked on this map, shorter by so much. Now it's a tiny amount, but it's enough. It'll contribute to your intonation being crap. So that's one problem, is that the intonation point moves. The second problem, obviously, is that this flat surface is not good for playing guitar. It'd feel like hell if you try to bend a string on that. Not least A, because it's flat, and B, because actually it's scored across the top by loads of really rough marks from this diagonal hatched file. This is the same, but it's a much smaller area. All right, but in principle the same is applied. We've got the same flat spot with really rough marks on all of the frets now. But the good thing is we have all of the frets are currently level. So let's take one of those frets in close up again, so we know that we've got this fret with a big flat spot on top. Okay. We know we want to get rid of that because A, because it's got loads of scratches on it, and B, because it's way too wide and you can't play guitar. So the thing we've got to do is we've got to, I'm going to do it this way out for a minute, we've got to reshape this fret so that it's a nice, not a very good example, but we've got to reshape it so that it's a nice curve again, and keeping the same point at the top, because we know that this point here is nicely leveled with the next one along there, and we don't want to take that down, but we do want to get rid of this flat top, so we cut away all this excess stuff that we no longer need, and we're left with a nice rounded shape again at the correct height. And if we can do that with all of the frets, then we've retained the level for all of them, but we've reshaped them so they now become good frets for playing guitar with, and the point of intonation is right at the top again. Okay, so that's the principle behind it. And then in practice, so we have a bunch of frets with flat spots with nasty scratches. So to do the reshaping part now, I'm going to go back with my marker pen, and I'm going to, you can hear it now, it's drawing marker pen on top of these really flattened, scratchy, raw surfaces. I'm going to draw pen on all of them. Now this time, last time the marker pen was to tell you where you had and hadn't cut. This time the marker pen will tell you something similar, but for a different reason. This time it'll tell you when you're cutting away at the sharp flattened shoulder on both sides of that fret, and you want to cut away at that, but you also, and I've just put some ink down the side of the paper, you also, and I've done it again, I'm going to have some work cut out, damn it. You also want to leave this time a tiny line down the middle of the fret, because that will tell you you haven't touched it, and therefore it's at the same height as when you started. And if you can leave every fret with a small, a very small black mark down the side, down the middle of each fret, then you'll know that you've reshaped it but not lowered it any. Okay, and to do that I'm going to use this fret crowning file, and I'm going to just start by, it's very powerful, it's got diamond coated concave surface, and basically you just run up and down the fret and it cuts away the shoulder of the flattened bit and reshapes the fret into a concave or convex. The concave shape here makes a convex shape here, and you basically have a nicely rounded fret again, no more sharp flat spot. Now once I've done that, I can then move on to the next one and just keep on going. It's as simple as that. You just got to keep your eye on it. You don't want to go lower than the paint mark, sorry, the marker pen. That marker pen, as long as there's a little bit of marker pen along the top, you know that that fret is essentially the same height as it was a minute ago when you leveled them all with that rough tool. So we just keep on going all the way to the end, and then at the end of this process we've now got level frets, we've got reshaped frets, so they're no longer flattened, and the only thing we don't have next, or we have to do, is to get polished frets, so they are then turned back into those lovely shiny steel frets that you could see the reflection in, and that a string will slide smoothly and easily across. Now when we come to the frets that had the most taken off them, because they were the highest, they will take more effort to round them off or to reprofile them. So we have to expect to spend a little bit more time than on the ones that didn't. So, keep on going. I was expecting this weekend to meet my new semi-acoustic guitar that I bought, That's an Antoria 335 copy, with the interesting name Rockstar. But I've heard a lot of good stuff about Antoria. I remember a friend of mine at school having an Antoria SG, which was the envy of all the guitars in our school bands back in Coventry in about 1981. Sort of just after the Scar explosion, or just around about the Specials Scar explosion. And actually John's Antoria was, thinking back on it, I think I knew at the time, its action was just unbelievable. And everybody in the whole sixth form at college knew that, because quite a few of us were in bands, but everybody knew that John's Antoria SG was just the business. And I don't know whether we thought he'd just got lucky or something. And I don't think it ever struck any of us that he knew some special set-up secret. I just think we all thought that once in a million years you've got the sort of, I don't know, it's like Excalibur or something, you know, the most perfect guitar in the world lived, I don't know, maybe at the bottom of a lake or something, and John came along and a hand came out of the lake holding this SG, and he picked it up. But it was sickeningly good, but it was incredibly low. And of course, to be that low, I guess somebody must have done this work once upon a time for that particular guitar. Don't think I'll ever quite know. I might still be able to ask John because he's on Facebook, but I'd like to know. Maybe I'd like to know whether he did it. Whatever it was, we knew at the time that it was just superb. He was also the kid at our school who could play lead guitar breaks. It seemed to elude everybody else. He just had that ability. Sort of depressing, really, because you know, he's I think he was a year or two below me at school, and he was already playing sort of grown-up rock and roll lead guitar breaks that I just couldn't hope to even emulate, and still haven't. John still plays in a couple of bands, I think. I know one of them's called The Snakes, I think it is, and the other one's called Limousine. And they're playing a lot in London and other such places. Never managed to get to see him because I'm never in London at the weekend when he plays. So unless he does a lunchtime gig in somewhere near Borough, I still don't think I'm going to get to see him in these bands. I bet he's still got that Antoria SG though. Anyway, my new Antoria never turned up, so I'm going to have to wait until next weekend to test it out with the band practice. Okay, we are just about at the end of this part of the process. So once again, you've seen with your own eyes and ears mostly how long this takes. We're in stage 2 of 3 of just doing the neck or the frets. So we now have reshaped frets, and what we now have to do is to sand those, sand and polish them, and that's going to take some careful work with particular grade of papers, and I'm going to get 2 grades out. The first one is I'm going to use some 800. Oh, I'm not going to use that first. I'm going to use some 240 first, and then we'll go to 800. That's the first one that came to hand. So I need some 240, which is the roughest stuff I've got. I'll get myself 4 bits of that. Okay, so I'll run out of, what do you want to call it? Memory in a minute. Okay, so just to visually sum up the task ahead, we've got a bunch of frets with, right on the top, marks left by this. Let's call that, I call it grit 0. So you've got grit 0, you've got a whole set of scratches down the sides with 300 grit on it. I'm going to get a load of 240 to take that backwards and bring that forwards, and we want to keep going with 240 until everything on here is 240, and then once we've got that and there are no more scratches at all from that, we're then going to take the 240 scratches down to 800, and once we've got down to 800 we're going to then run a bunch of micromesh papers from 1500 through to 12,000, which effectively polishes it. And the real difficulty in this process is making sure that we don't progress from that paper to that paper until we've removed all of those marks. This one's a bit of a red herring. If we concentrate on getting rid of these marks with this paper, and we're going to use a magnifying glass to make sure we have, and plenty of light, once we've got rid of that with that paper, then we can move to this, and then we'll be on the home straight with that. And then the neck will be ready to go back into the guitar. So it's a long, drawn-out process. Okay, so here we go. More noise. I'm going to do this using my combination, first of all, of my fingers and then this block. So the game here is to just use finger pressure, and this 240 will be removing some metal. But the principle here is, as long as you remove the same amount of metal from all the frets, then it's you'll be taking them down relatively evenly. I'm just going to keep going until I've used up the first piece. It takes the abrasive stuff off pretty quickly, but it's fine. It's sort of quite a good way of measuring the progress in a way, because once we've kind of cut through a piece of paper and move on to the next one, I think it takes about 2 of these before it's worth checking them visually to see if we've got rid of the scratches left by the fret leveling file. There's not really any point until that point, until we've got through probably 2 of these. So I'm just concentrating at this point in time primarily on covering all of the frets roughly the same amount. And the reason I'm doing it by hand is because the sort of flexibility of your finger pads kind of helps to stop flat spots developing, because we've just spent quite a bit of time getting rid of those flat spots. So the last thing we want to do is to go and put them back on by rubbing with a block. So I'm going to continue. Actually, at this point I could switch to using a pointed block or a wedge, and that sort of goes up and down into the over the fret, like your fingers. It's a bit easier. Also quite rough on the paper, so it rips the paper apart fairly quickly. rips the hell out of the middle part of the paper. So I'll just carry on a bit with my fingers, and then at this point we'll stop and have a look with a microscope, no, magnifying glass. Now, it might be that we're at the right place and can move on, but it's really critical to check, and I've found through experience that if I assume that it's done, and it pretty much looks done from here, but if I assume that it's done, what will happen is if I miss the tiniest scratches that were the fret leveling file left behind, what happens is that you carry on polishing and you think you're shining it up and it's getting closer to being finished and polished, and what happens is it's polishing around those little scratches, and you can end up getting a very nice looking set of frets which actually have these little what do you call them, potholes still in them, and it's those that will only show up when you've restrung the guitar and gone through all the rigmarole of stringing it, and then you discover it's got these little scratches in, and to be honest, they make it practically unplayable even though they're almost invisible. So, sort of extreme though it might seem, this attention to detail is just critical, because this is what makes the difference between a really nice reloved guitar and something else. Now, I'm quite pleased that so far I can't find any scratches from the fret leveling file. You usually would expect to find a couple down this far end where it's easy to overlook the frets. No, that's brilliant, we're there. Okay, so now I can move straight on and put aside the 240 stuff and move straight on to 800. And this is a do it by feel now. All we're doing really now is taking away the 240 scratches and converting them to 800 smaller scratches, a finer grade of scratch. Which is all that polishing is, when you come down to it. Finer and finer scratches. Again, I'm concentrating on the smoothness of those frets. The roundedness of them is really important, as well as the overall shininess of them. It's getting that real nice rolling arch shape back out of them. Okay, so I'm going to do one more piece of 800, and then we'll move to the what's it paper, the micro mesh pad. This is feeling good, we're on the track. With a bit of luck we'll get this nice looking guitar polished up indoors in a nice room tomorrow, and then listed and up on eBay, I guess Tuesday, I think. Right, so we've done the 240 stuff. Now we're going to switch to the micro mesh. The micro mesh is we're going from 800 to 1500 in one jump. So you want to spend a bit of extra time on this. Just a couple minutes, really. And that's all this is now, a series of progressively finer scratches, making this into a nice playable surface for your guitar strings to slide around on. It's losing now, progressively losing its power to take away material, and then we can move quicker now to the different stages. They're a much closer grip. This one is 1800. And on we go. So here we are, 2400. There's 200. Very, very robust, these sheets. That's what I like about them. They seem to last for a very, very long time. 4,000. 6,000. So I'm predicting, sadly, I think there's going to be 3 spots where the ink from the pen has bled through under the radar or onto the maple fingerboard. It just slips of the hand, really. It's very easy to do, and we're going to need these papers to get rid of them, because for some reason it's not a solvent known to man that will take that marker pen off maple. I don't know why that is, but somehow it just soaks up into the wood straight away. Okay, so I'm going to keep these out because I have that sinking feeling that I'm going to need those micromesh papers. I've been those. Get another set of things hit.